o'clock. Oh, good, we're there. Welcome to the first Lenten Poetry and Organ Concert of 2022. We're in a new year, and it's a pleasure to see you all here. Thank you so much for coming. We have with us today Steve Bradbury, an old friend from way back. We met in 1974 going to school in Gainesville. I was going to school. You were sort of itinerant, I think.
I was bumming around.
He was bumming around. He was far more studious than I was, though, I have to say. He is a fabulous student of literature. He could, in fact, would you just go ahead and recite The Wasteland right now? Or Proof Rock?
I don't think they came for that.
They didn't come for that, you're right. I don't blame them either. But he just had this book. He's a translator, a Chinese language scholar, and he has two contemporary Chinese poets he translates, and he's moving into Macedonians, I think. Is that correct? Yeah. But this book, which incidentally, which he brought copies of, won the 21 Penn Translation Award, which is kind of like the Pulitzer for translating. And he lived in Taiwan for I think maybe 25 years teaching English in the literature, right?
Literature, yeah.
I kind of meant English, like an English teacher teaches literature. I
Yeah.
should have said literature. You see what I mean? He was a studious one. Not I. But let me give you Steve. I hate long introductions when there's so much wonderful things. There's so many wonderful things to come. My good friend.
Yeah, you can see now. Yeah, Sean and I go way back. Can you hear me well? Because it sounds like it's just a little bit of an echo. And yeah. Yes, I do need that. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate that. So I thought I would start with a couple of poems and then maybe read some translations. So the first poem I'm going to read is from Decade, which is the anthology for the Poetry and Barbecue Festival that Sean has put together the last, decade, right? 10 years, right? And I wrote this poem for a friend of mine who was greatly distressed and depressed at turning 50. And I was thinking, what would I not give to be 50? And it's called, As You Lie There in Your Birthday Suit. Viewing the latest rushes of the soap opera your life has become, all you can think of is, today you are 1 year farther from your nativity and that much closer to judgment. As if the day weren't depressing enough, your loved ones are nettled and predictably alarmed that you have locked the door they once freely entered, and wonder if you know your own mind. But then you wonder yourself. At times you feel your world is unraveling around you. At other times you're wound so tight that you could break. On a lighter note, the day is young and almost anything could happen. Married or single, travel is an option, for a change of scenery is bound to do wonders for your morale, although it could play havoc with your checkbook. In any case, why not put that home improvement plan on ice? Get out and about and make a fresh start. The trouble is, once you start, you may not want to stop. You may not stop and may not want to either. a sonnet on the pleasures of table talk, titled On the Eros of Their Conversation. If this is where we make our bed, he mused, apropos of nothing they had said, but in answer to the latent question around which they had played for hours like children let from school as they reveled in their near animal pleasure in the rough and tumble of each other's conversation. So be it. For is this not love's sweetest part, the gentle art of letting your hair down over a verbal pratfall, of falling into the arms of a ribald pun, of peeling the layers of a juicy illusion that leaves you lying in such a state of linguistic undress that you begin to wonder where these words will take you when all the words are finally gone. Yes, very nice, very playful, but enough play. Andrew, yesterday was Ash Wednesday, the beginning of the Lenten season, a period of self-reflection and the reflection on the suffering of others. And tomorrow, by the way, is the feast day of Saint Casimir, the Polish peacemaker, and I'm hoping he can have some influence on events unfolding in Ukraine. So I wrote a poem in 2016 after I heard about the Paris bombings, which were quite terrible. And the poem is called After the Paris Bombings. I lent my daily missal, the Marino Missal, this missal, which was published before they dropped the Latin, to Robin. Although she'd been raised a Catholic in an Irish-Italian suburb of Boston in the 60s, had even been a choir boy, or so she said, until she saw the light, so to speak. It could have been the Koran, for all she knew. And I had to agree. I was as reluctant to take it back as she was to keep it, for its relentless litany of martyrdoms and persecutions reminded us a little too much of CNN and of something Joe Brainerd once said on the problem of history. It seems like every day is the anniversary of something awful. I'm not a Catholic, but my first girlfriend was, and she gave me this Maryknoll Missal when we separated. And I've been reading it ever since. It's an amazing book. But it is full of, the history of the Catholic Church is horrific. It's just really, to be reminded of all the suffering that has happened and still happens every day. Seems like every day is the anniversary for something awful. But perhaps not today. Today is the feast day of Saint Catherine Drexel. Does anybody know who she is? Catherine Drexel. She was among the first women in America to have been canonized. She lived in the late 19th century and till probably, I think, around World War II. She was the daughter of a very wealthy banker, and she became a nun, and she used her wealth to pay for scores of churches, parishes, schools, for Native Americans and Afro-Americans. In fact, she founded Xavier College in Louisiana, which is still the only black Catholic university in the United States. And she also founded the church in St. Augustine, where Martin Luther King brainstormed his strategy for the Civil Rights March in 1964, which the church was taken down right after, which makes me think of some of the ironies of civil rights and of segregation. I don't know if you're aware of it, but many of the black schools in the United States had some of the best teachers in the world because blacks couldn't get jobs in white schools. With segregation, which I'm not arguing against, one of the ironies is that after segregation, all the cities and counties closed all the black schools, fired all the black teachers, and they had to get jobs as janitors or dishwashers. It was a terrible waste of talent. And anyway, they lived very hard-scrabble lives. So I thought I would talk a little bit about a hard-scrabble poet that I translate, whose name is Amang. She's Taiwanese. She's from Taiwan. She writes in Chinese, but she speaks Taiwanese, which is a totally different language, with her parents. I only lived in Taiwan for 20 years, and I was a university professor. I taught modernism. I translated poetry. I actually translated maybe 20 poets, but I've only done books for 3. And Amang is my most recent book, which did win the PEN Translation Award. She grew up on the East Coast, the scenic East Coast of Taiwan, and she had a hard-scrabble childhood. And much of that comes out in the poems that she wrote that I translated. But I thought I'd like to do something more. We got invited to Vermont for a month to work on this book, and that's where we started it in 2016, which is when I started landscape drawing, and I've been drawing ever since. And we, every day, because she walks around barefoot on rocks, and she's a mountain girl. So we would climb, we were up in Johnson, Vermont, which is a really beautiful part of the country. And we would walk up into the hemlock forest where we would discuss her poems and my translations. And our conversations were so heated and so vivacious and covered so many topics that I started surreptitiously recording them. And when she found out, she was a little pissed, but I said, well, let's include choice snippets in the book, and she thought that was a good idea. So we not only have my translations and her poems in this book, we have judicious conversations, very juicy conversations, but also some of my drawings and many of her photographs. She's a terrific photographer and also makes poetry videos. So I'm going to read the title poem of this book called Raised by Wolves. The title of the poem is Lang Yang De. Sean, I thought you said they were fluent speakers of Chinese. You mean I have to read it in English? Okay. Raised by wolves. By the way, this cover, that is her hand holding a snake. She really is raised by wolves. Raised by wolves. 3 months had passed, and Ma and Pa had not come down the mountain. The local grocery would no longer honor our IOUs. I hadn't the strength to run or climb a tree. Granny led me to the water to drink my fill. Then it came. I'm very small. I reach for the sky as I wobble back and forth, a child just learning how to stagger. Reflected in its eye, embraced by clouds in the sky, that's me. From its mountain lair, it came bounding down to the gravelly shore, setting land and sea on fire, making Granny's bed boil and seethe. I hear them going at it all night long, but then I fall asleep and wake to find heaped at my feet freshly slaughtered chicken and sheep and all the fish I love to eat. Granny's bustling round the fire. A monkey is leaping from tree to tree. A Mustang busting to the wall. That's me, raised by wolves. God, I wish I could have included that in the book. I might have sold a copy. The other poet, the other poet I'm working on quite a lot is also equally interesting, but has a very different life. Her name is Xia Yu. She's also from Taiwan, writes in Chinese. She lived for many years in southern France, in Cézanne country, in Aix-en-Provence. And she wrote a whole book about her experiences there and in Paris called Salsa, which I translated in 2014. It's my favorite book by her, and I'm going to read my favorite poem in the book by her, which I did almost, 12 years ago. It's called, what is it called? It's called 最熟最烂的夏天. I can't believe they don't speak Chinese. Yeah. It's called the ripest, rankest, juiciest summer ever. It's a good title, isn't it? Yeah, actually the Chinese, the word for ripe is the same word for rank. I don't know how they figure that out, but so I was talking to her and I says, well, how am I going to translate, lan? Because it can mean ripe, but it could also mean rank, rotted, And she says, well, why can't you, in English the words are mutually exclusive. And she says, well, why don't you use both words? And I thought, that's smart. So I used ripest, rankest. No, I'm sorry. Not ripest and rankest. Ripest and rankest and juiciest. Rankest and juiciest, the same word is. So if you're saying something, fruit is rotten, you could say, lan. But if it was really, if something was really tender like meat, you'd say, 最好烂. So tender meat and rotten peaches use the same word. I have a note at the top here to tell me to slow down. I tend to speak too quickly. The ripest, see, this is all just an excuse to say this title again. The ripest, rankest, juiciest summer ever. Summer sinks into the clock face of the cat's eye, sinks into chestnut-colored limbs. A 17-franc basket of peaches. Day 4, and already summer has run from ripe to rank. All spring long, we dined as if we had all the time in the world, followed with interest the color, light, and atmosphere. Observed the shadows of the grapevine advancing to this last evening of the post-impressionists. Dabs of light thicken on the hammock, grow thin on the wind-blown curtain, each stroke acquiring definition as the last stroke added bursts grape skin. Must be August, ripe for the fallists. Never again will mere light so delight us, and oh, how we weary of atmosphere. Our words runneth over like vines in the arbor of this ripest, rankest, juiciest summer ever. And oh, how we weary of style. Does style, after all, exist? So like the snow, defiled at the merest touch. But while the snow does not exist, the hammock is more manifest than ever. More than April irises or an aperitif at 6. Although compared to soccer broadcast live, hardly anything exists. Our visitor, a scholar of early Chinese architecture, says that in our benighted age, only armed revolution is so laden with tragic implication. And then there is soccer. Oh, how we eat as if we had all the time in the world. Smoked salmon, crab, and lobster. And will you look at the size of this oyster? If we could but find the proper venues to release our leftist tendencies. 1906, Cezanne, caught in a storm, returns to his studio, removes his hat and coat, and lies down by the window. Taking stock of the table, the toppled basket of apples, the apples and their shadows, the three skulls, the pitcher, the crock, the half-open drawer, the clock. It occurs to him proportion is hardly worth the fuss, and he could care even less if the table were askew. As he dies, his eyelids trace a line pointing straight to 3 o'clock. Still, there's something wanting in this. Must be time for Matisse. I love the way you moved from post-impressionism into Fauvism. Very, very elegant. Yeah, that should be in a book. Actually, we should be doing CDs, I think. Yes. So I thought I'd close with a poem by one of the great religious poets, Gerard Manley Hopkins. He's so wonderful. And, you know, it's amazing that he didn't publish anything when he was alive, but luckily he was in correspondence with another poet named Robert Bridges who collected all the poems and published them posthumously. But he's really quite great. And the older I get, and the more I read him, the more I like him. Anyway, I'm just going to read, I guess my favorite. It's called Pied Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple-colored as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire-cold chestnut falls, finches' wings, landscapes plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, plow. In all trades their gear and tackle and trim. All things counter, original, spare, strange. Whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, by swift, slow, sweet, sour, adactyl, dim, he fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him.
So, thank you for coming and for, wow, what a wonderful start to this series, to the lengthening of the hours. We have coming next week Janice Ray of Reedsville, Georgia, and she wrote a wonderful memoir about growing up in a junkyard, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood. And she's also a poet. And we have Rick Campbell coming, who was here last Lent. And we just thought we hadn't gotten to the bottom of Rick Campbell, so we invited him back. And we don't have to reach out. We still have 3 more after that, but it will all happen as it happens. But come next week for Janice, and thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's wonderful. We have Steve's books are here if you'd like, and we also have copies of the anthology that he read from that came from our literary foundation, our local literary foundation. So anyway, thank you again for coming.